This week I've got Solo, a Star Wars story, and I am such a huge Star Wars fan, and this is one of the few movies that I was actually really just not excited to see. Like, I don't need a Han Solo backstory. I don't need to know anything else about him. I just want to know he's like a sexy smuggler rogue. But for whatever reason, they decided to dive into his backstory. And also, Alden Ehrenreich plays Han Solo this time around. And the events of this story don't take place like that far in advance of the episode 4. So it's very confusing how he, one, grew like a foot to become the Han Solo we know as Harrison Ford, and two, just completely changed features. And yes, I get it. You're casting a different actor, but to me, also just energy-wise, like Donald Glover plays Lando Calrissian, and to me, energy-wise, he matched Billy D. Williams' eventual portrayal of Lando Calrissian. Alden he didn't do it for me. Like, I just see like a boyish dude up there, and I'm like, I don't want that in my Han Solo. I want, an adult rogue masculine man. So that from the start, it set me down like the road of like really not that into this movie. I'm going to try and do the spoiler free, but this is the backstory of how Han meets Lando. This is the backstory of the Falcon. This is the backstory of how Han meets Chewie. And it's tough with these sort of prequel-ish films because you have a general sense of like, okay, well, we don't see these characters again. And my understanding is like I'm not super familiar with the extended universe of Star Wars necessarily. Like I don't watch Rebels. I haven't really read the books. So I'm more like a cinematic person when it comes to that stuff. So I understand that there are some ties to other parts of the Star Wars canon, but I wasn't familiar with them. And I think other movie watchers are also going to be a little lost in that sense. So we meet young Han on the planet that he's from. He and Emilia Clarke's character, Kira, grow up together. And it's the story of how Han escapes that life and ends up in the life of a smuggler. He meets Woody Harrelson along the way. Woody Harrelson and Thandie Newton. Oh my God, I love Thandie Newton so much. Like I could absolutely watch a Star Wars movie with her. So he falls into kind of a smuggler criminal life with them. Jon Favreau plays the voice of one of the other smugglers. And I found it so distracting because I was just like, he doesn't sound like he should be in a Star Wars movie. He sounds like he should be in Brooklyn. So again, this movie just like, I feel like there were off bits here and there. And I don't know if a part of it is because halfway or even not even halfway through, they switched out the directors of Phil Lord and Chris Miller and they brought in Ron Howard. I don't know if that's responsible for the tonal shifts. I'm sure some of it's that, but the casting choices were Miller and Lord. So I'm like, oh, well, maybe these characters were cast in roles that the script eventually didn't, fit. And so that's why there's such a dissonance there. The action is fine. I honestly thought the scope of the movie was going to be much larger than it was. Like, a mild spoiler, but it takes place and involves, we finally see the Kessel Run. So, it really doesn't have that large of like a scale. And I feel like we're used to that in Star Wars movies. Like even Rogue One is like, hey, we're saving the universe essentially. And this is just kind of too small of a story. And it also makes me worry a little bit about the other upcoming backstory ones. Like I know they just announced that there's going to be, they have a director for the Boba Fett prequels. And I'm like, again, this is a character where the beauty of Boba Fett is that we don't really know anything about him. And I thought the prequels, like episodes 1, 2, and 3 ruined that about him. I love the fact that I didn't know he was just this mysterious bounty hunter in like a ridiculous helmet. And so the more we deep dive into these backgrounds, like the less I'm enjoying these types of movies. I will say I do love the new droid in this. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is the voice of her. Yes, her. Phoebe Waller-Bridge is from Fleabag, which if you haven't seen is really funny and brilliant. The only thing I wish is that they hadn't made her like the only really female droid we deal with, like a super feminine. I know that sounds weird, but there's a scene where like she's basically like a flirtatious droid, and like even her walk is animated with like more hip action. Why couldn't she just have been a female voice in a droid body? Are you really telling me that droids are so sexualized and gendered like that? Like, it seems a little bit of a stretch. And also, so frustrating. This movie does not pass the Bechdel test, because even if we call her character's L337, which is elite, come on, nerds. Nerds being the people who wrote this. Her character is talking to Emilia Clarke's Kira about, Lando and Han and all that stuff. And I'm like, so that means the only two essentially named female, again, we'll call her female, characters in this movie are having a conversation about men. How disappointing is that? But I digress. I still thought she was one of my favorite parts of the movie. Paul Bettany plays Dryden Voss, who is the villain of this film. He's fine. He has this very bizarre, weird crack nail. It kind of freaked me out. His face is all messed up. We don't know why. It's very bizarre. And honestly, he's fine. Like, he's fine as the villain, but I I just wish they hadn't made this movie, honestly. Like, I didn't need this movie. The movie I really wanted to see was the Lando backstory, because I think Lando is the other greatest part of this movie. And I know some people have trouble with Donald Glover's interpretation of it. They feel like it's too much of a caricature, but I thought he was great. I will watch him in pretty much anything. I truly think that if Black Panther had come out a couple of years before and done as well as it did, we would have had the Lando backstory, because I think they would have gone, oh, look, a movie that's carried by a Black character can do well financially. What a surprise. That this should have been a surprise to no one. The plot itself is fine. It's nothing brilliant. It's nothing new. I feel like this doesn't bring anything super revelatory to the Star Wars universe. Like, yes, we see some bits that's like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, I elbowed my friend like, oh, that appears in this one. I get it. But aside from that, like, I feel like this was unfortunately just an unnecessary addition. It felt a little cobbled together in parts. Also, there's just moments where you can feel Ron Howard just like shoehorning things in. Like, his brother, spoiler, his brother cameos in it, and his brother cameos in almost all the movies, and he does not look like he belongs in the Star Wars universe. So it's just... I'm people are going to see it anyway, so that's fine. But if you're on the fence about it, you know what? Maybe this is one you skip. I can't believe I'm saying that about a Star Wars movie that's not the episode 1, 2, 3. But yeah, I'm only going to give it 3 out of 5. This week I've also got First Reformed, and this movie got super overhyped for me. I'm not going to lie. Like, I'm not trying to be a super downer this week, but I was just a little bit disappointed by some of the fare out there. First Reformed stars Ethan Hawke, and he's a pastor at a small upstate, pretty much empty, upstate New York church. I guess the church is like a historical landmark basically, and they're they're reconsecrating it as a celebration of the anniversary. It's written and directed by Paul Schrader, and Paul Schrader wrote Taxi Driver, and he wrote Raging Bull and The Last Temptation of Christ, so he is a great writer. I don't know if he translates into like a modern day writer-director. I felt this film was like a little bit antiquated, and I'm not gonna lie, like a lot of the people who were kind of hyping this film to me were like older white men, and so that might be a consideration, considering I'm not, and so I might not be the target audience for this. I thought Ethan Hawke's performance was fine. It's clearly a showcase piece. It also stars Amanda Seyfried as a woman named Mary. She's pregnant, and her husband is kind of dealing with some dark demons. Not literal demons. I saw the trailer for this, and I thought maybe it was going to be like a haunted movie, because it's from A24, and they do a lot of impressive horror movies. So I was like, oh God, what's going to happen? But no, it's not a horror movie in the supernatural sense. So her character goes to Ethan Hawke's character for advice, for counseling, and she tries to bring her husband into it. Ethan Hawke's character so the church he's at is basically it lives in the shadow of this other mega church that is run by Cedric the Entertainer, who is perfectly serious in this role, and I thought he did a very nice job. I think he's credited as Cedric Kyle, so it's one of those like Chris Bridges instead of Ludacris. He's dropping the entertainer part and trying to be taken seriously in this. I just felt this movie was preachy. Like, I think there's a way to talk about religion, and I think there's a way to... It also... So one of the big issues that they face is Amanda Seyfried's character's husband is, feeling like the planet is doomed, which is a feeling that I can relate to. It's like global warming and pollution and war and all the horrible things that are possibly in our future, and he feels this overwhelming sense of, despair towards it. And I'm like, I feel you on that. And Ethan Hawke's character, Reverend Toller is his name, tries to, counsel him through it. And Ethan Hawke's character has had something horrible happen in his life, and, he's still survived past it, and so kind of trying to reconcile that. And the thing is, I think you can talk about modern day issues like that. I think you can talk about global warming, and I think you can even talk about religion without being preachy, and this movie did not do that. And so I kind of checked out part of the way through. Like, it's not that, it's like under 2 hours, but I felt like it was longer, and I kept kind of going like, when is this going to end? I won't spoil it, but I felt like the ending was a super cop-out. It builds, and there's so much anticipation, and you're like, oh my God, things are getting really interesting. Like, in my notes, I was like, oh, it took, an hour and something in, but I'm really into this. Like, I think the last 20 minutes are more suspenseful and interesting than the entire first part of the film. And then at the end, it lets you down. Like, I felt let down. I didn't enjoy the ending. I thought it could have been much more appropriate to the amount of tension that they had built prior to. So I'm only going to give this one 2.5 out of 5. Like, this is a skip one for me. I know it's going to try and be an awards bait, but I past it. There were a couple good moments, but not enough to justify the rest of the film. But finally this week, I have RBG, and oh man, I feel like this should be required viewing for everyone. It's a documentary about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who you might know as Notorious RBG, and it's a really interesting, comprehensive look at her career. I think a lot of us know Justice Ginsburg from now. Like, we understand, like, hey, she's really important. She, you know, when she writes a dissent, it's an important thing in the court, especially because now that, you know, the balance of conservative versus liberal, it keeps shifting. Like, she kind of essentially adjusts to become more left in a sense, which isn't necessarily left of moderate, but it's left compared to the other people on the court. And I'm like, man, we need Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Like, she cannot leave that bench. So it's an interesting look at the history of what brought her to, you know, basically it's a look through her career and her life. And there's some beautiful stuff in there about her relationship with her husband. And I teared up. It was a real kicker. You get to see this very bizarre friendship between her and Justice Scalia, which, like, you know, obviously on the court or on the bench, they are about the most opposite you can get, but off the court, they have a very respectful and, like, playful relationship. I thought the documentary itself, it's well done. It's definitely well done. I think a lot of it, though, depends on the kind of interesting nature of the subject involved. Like, I think she carries a lot of the documentary. So, you know, it's absolutely worth checking out. It's just a fascinating look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg's career, and you learn so much about her and how just so brilliant she is, because even from an early stage in her career, she was like, no, the court isn't ready for this type of case. And you could see her paving this path for the kind of historical argument she did make in front of the Supreme Court before she was a justice that really sort of impacted our everyday lives and allow us the freedoms that we have. So I highly recommend seeing RBG. I'm going to give it 4.5 out of 5.